Hello, my name is Dr. Jonathan Greenberg, and this is the fourth video in the mini masterclass series. Today, we're going to talk about the how question of musical interpretation. Previously, we talked about the three questions: the what, the why, and the how. We delved deeper into the what and why in the last two videos, and today I wanted to talk more about the how. Now, the how is kind of the place we spend probably the most amount of time out of these in these three questions, because there's a lot of practice and experimentation that goes along with it. um, and when we know our what the composer wrote, what the details are, like we discussed previously, and the why, we've given thought to what do those details mean, why is the composer writing what he is writing, then the question becomes how. What tools, what musical and technical tools do we have to express the music in the best way possible? And so I'm going to talk to you about a few things that are kind of the general ideas of what we use in order to express that. The first one is sound, right? The number one thing we use in music for anything, for expression, is sound. So the number one thing that we as violinists or string players use is the bow. So question number one is, what bowings are we going to use? Now, sometimes we want to be more precisely doing what the composer wrote. Sometimes we want, to do some changes. There are different opinions and approaches to that. I'm not going to get into that. Make sure you know what the composer actually wrote. It's important to get a good edition for that. And then make the choices that are applicable. So for instance, there are composers that we know that we can, the bowings may be more fluent, and there's more fluid, and there's composers that we would not do that. Number two, what articulations, what bow strokes are we going to be using? Okay, the composer wrote a dot, a staccato, or an accent. There are millions of ways of expressing each one of those details. So we go back to our why. What is the composer trying to express? What articulations are we going to be using to best express that? Bow distribution. How are we going to use our bow to express the line of the music, to build the sound in a way that expresses what the musical phrasing, what the musical structure is trying to achieve? And tone. What kind of sound are we looking for? What colors are we trying to find in our playing to express the music? Another big area is the question of time, rubato. When a composer writes music, it is not like a machine that plays every note in its precise timing. What pacing really expresses the music in the best way possible? And there's no one answer. Obviously, again, it's a question of which composer are we playing, and with certain kinds of music we have more flexibility, with other kinds of music we have less flexibility. But there's always a question of pacing, there's always a question of time, and in that there's also a question of what is our internal pulse. Okay, so the composer, let's say, wrote the music in 4/4, but the music in its internal feel might be more in, 2 beats per measure, or even 1 beat per measure. That internal feel of how the pacing of the music completely changes how we express and perform the music. Next question is fingerings. That is not simply a technical question. I remember I once heard from the great violist and Professor Roger Chase to choose fingerings that best help express the tension between the notes, right? So a lot of what the expression of music is how one note goes to the next. And that fingering can either help us achieve that or the opposite. Now, sometimes there's less choice, sometimes there's more choice, obviously. Sometimes the composer tells what they want. For instance, they want us to play everything on the G string or on the D string. That is a musical choice. And still we have an ability to choose fingerings, like for instance, between going a fingering that keeps us in position versus a fingering that requires us to have an extension. That physical feeling of fingering extensions can express better the tension between the notes and help us express that. Also slides, obviously, again, this is a question of taste, and there are violinists who slide back and forth many times, and there are those that that play in a much more pure and clean way. Find a way that is the most meaningful and honest to your musical opinion and interpretation. I would say that there are extremes which are probably less tasteful, and at the same time there's this very, very wide range of what is doable and acceptable. And again, you have to know what music you're playing. So obviously, if you're playing Bach versus if you're playing Wieniawski, it's going to be very, very different choices. Last but not least is vibrato. Vibrato is oftentimes only an afterthought, and the truth is that vibrato not only helps us express, which this is something that a lot of people know, but vibrato is affects the sonority, how the violin resonates, and therefore choices of vibrato that don't take the phrasing, don't take the music into account, can actually hinder the musical expression that you're trying to achieve. So, for instance, if you're going to vibrate only according to what's comfortable to you, but let's say there's an accented note that ended up being with the fourth finger, didn't get the vibrato that the preceding 16 notes with the third finger got, then obviously that is going to hinder the musical expression that you are trying to achieve with all the other things that we discussed. So now that we've discussed the general ideas of the three questions and kind of delved a little bit deeper into them, next time I'm going to start taking specific musical excerpts of the violin repertoire, and I am going to take those ideas, those questions, and apply them to different excerpts, one video at a time. If you have any requests, feel free to send them to me, and thank you so much. I'll see you next time.